They put her name between the dining sideboard and the linen curtains on the third page of the household inventory, in the same careful hand used to appraise the silver candlesticks and the wool carpets, as though she were simply another article to be measured, valued, and passed along with the rest of Heronmere. One line, no title, no history, no acknowledgement that the person named had spent 7 years scrubbing hearths and keeping ledgers in a house that had once been her own. Fenella bride, bonded housekeeper, 7 years' service, to transfer with the estate. The new Earl of Heronmere read that line. Then he set his pen down, looked up from the document, and in a voice quiet enough to stop every man in the room said, "Who drew up this inventory?" Not one man in that room understood yet what that question was going to cost them. Fenella had been at Heronmere for 7 years, and in all that time she had learned to make herself the sort of person a room forgets. She had arrived at 18, already practiced at smallness. The woman who brought her had spoken only once during the 3-day journey north from the city, to tell her that she would work, and she would not ask questions, and she would be grateful. Fenella had not felt grateful. She had felt, more than anything, that something was being taken from her, that she could not yet name clearly enough to grieve. She learned quickly how to enter a room without drawing eyes, how to carry a tray as though the tray were reason enough to be anywhere, how to listen without appearing to. These were not the skills she had expected to need in her life, but they were the skills she had, and she used them with the same quiet discipline she applied to everything else. She was 25 before she understood, fully, that she had grown up inside a lie, that the house she cleaned and kept and moved through every day was the house her father had built, that the name she answered to was not her own, that the woman who had brought her here, who had told her her parents were gone, and the debt was real, and this was simply how things were, had been paid to say all of it. By that time she had been at Heronmere for 7 years. She had nowhere else to go, and no proof of anything, and half of a painted miniature sewn into the lining of her apron that she touched sometimes at night and tried to remember. So she stayed. She kept the fires and the books and the inventory of the linens. And she waited, though she could not have said for what. Sir Dacre Collis had owned Heronmere for 12 years. He had not worked for it, and he had not built it, and he had, in Fenella's quiet estimate, never understood a single room in it. He knew the value of the cellar and the approximate weight of the silver, and he had twice tried to sell the library and been talked out of it by his solicitor, Mr. Skett, who understood that libraries were one of the things buyers expected a great house to contain. He was not a cruel man in the direct sense. He did not raise his voice or make demands that were unreasonable. He simply moved through Heronmere as though it had always been his and always would be, with the easy confidence of a man who has never had to question his own right to a thing. Fenella had spent 7 years reading his face. She knew it, the way. She knew the creaking stair and the draft behind the drawing-room paneling. When the creditors came in late October, she read his face then too, and what she saw was not fear. It was the resigned composure of a man who has been expecting a bill for some time and has quietly arranged to have someone else pay it. The estate was to be sold. The announcement came not as news, but as the end of a long silence. The Earl of Heronmere arrived on a Wednesday. Fenella saw the carriage from the upper landing window. Dark lacquered wood, no crest on the door, 4 matched bays that moved with the particular ease of horses that had always been well kept. She had a theory about carriages. The ones that needed you to notice them announced themselves loudly. This one arrived without ceremony and expected to be taken seriously anyway. She should have gone back to the linen room. Every instinct honed over 7 years of making herself invisible said so. She did not. She stayed at the window until the Earl stepped down, and then she watched him, because something about the deliberateness with which he moved made her forget, briefly, that she was not supposed to watch. He was younger than she had expected. Perhaps 32, perhaps a little older. Dark coat, no ornamentation. He did not look up at the house the way visitors did with an appraiser's calculation. He looked at the garden first, then at the east wing, where the stonework had been repaired badly and the color was still wrong. Then, for just a moment, at the window where Fenella stood. She stepped back. By the time she had composed herself and gone down the servants' stair, he was already in the great hall with Sir Dacre and Mr. Skett and 2 men from the solicitor's firm, and the household inventory had been spread open on the long table for his inspection. Fenella came in from the side passage, as she always did, carrying a tray no one had asked for, because a woman with a tray has reason to be anywhere. She set it on the sideboard and did not leave, because she had learned that no one in a room full of important men looks at the help, and she wanted to see what this man did when he read. She watched him read the way she had once watched solicitors go through her father's papers, methodically, page by page, without expression. Sir Dacre was talking. He was always talking when he felt the ground unsteady beneath him, about the east wing and the exceptional quality of the cellar. The Earl did not appear to be listening. He turned a page. He turned another. He reached the 3rd page. She watched his eyes stop. She watched him read a line, and then she watched him, slowly and deliberately, read it again. The hall had gone quiet in a particular way, not the comfortable quiet of men waiting, the uneasy quiet of men who have felt a change in temperature without knowing where the draft is coming from. The Earl set the document on the table. He looked up. His gaze moved past Sir Dacre, past Mr. Skett, past the solicitor's men, and came to rest on the woman at the sideboard with the empty tray. Fenella felt it. It was not the usual look, dismissive, absent, the look of a man clocking a servant and forgetting her in the same moment. It was a look with something in it she could not name. She did not lower her eyes, though she had been trained to. She looked back. Something moved across his face, brief, gone before she could identify it. Then he said quietly, "Who drew up this inventory?" Mr. Skett cleared his throat. "I did, my lord, from Sir Dacre's accounting. It is a full and lawful. I have no doubt of its thoroughness." The Earl's voice was even. "What I am inquiring about is this entry, on the 3rd page, between the sideboard and the curtains." He indicated the page once. A bonded housekeeper listed as transferable property. Who authorized that notation? Sir Dacre spoke carefully. "A standard arrangement, my lord. The girl has been bonded to the household these 7 years under a debt indenture. The bond is legal and witnessed. I am quite sure it has been made to appear so." The Earl looked at the line one more time. Then, "Bring me writing materials, please." Mr. Skett blinked. "My lord?" "Writing materials," the Earl repeated, in precisely the same tone, as though the man had not heard and might not merit a third telling. "Pen and ink." The clerk fumbled with his case, and produced both, and carried them to the head of the table, with the carefulness of a man handing over something that might detonate. He set them down and stepped back a full pace. Sir Dacre tried again. "My lord, if there is any difficulty with the terms." "The terms are quite clear," the Earl said. He was looking at the document. "That is what concerns me." He took up the pen. He dipped it, and in the quiet of that old hall, with 6 men watching, and a woman at the sideboard holding very still, the Earl of Caerwyn bent over the 3rd page of the inventory and wrote a single clause at the bottom of it. He did not read it aloud. He set the pen down, folded the page once, and put it inside his coat, close against him. Then he looked at Sir Dacre with an expression that might almost have been pleasant, and said, "I'll take the estate, Everything as listed. Have the transfer documents ready by Friday. And nothing on this inventory is to be moved, dismissed, or otherwise altered before then. Nothing. Do I make myself understood?" "Perfectly, my lord," said Mr. Skett. "Perfectly," said Sir Dacre, smiling, because he believed he had managed things. Fenella watched that smile and felt for the first time in 7 years something that surprised her. She felt afraid for the man who was wearing it. That evening, after the solicitors had gone and the house had emptied of strangers, Maura found her in the kitchen banking the last of the fires. Maura had been cook at Heronmere for longer than Fenella had been alive. She was a compact, unhurried woman who had outlasted 3 owners by the simple method of being too useful to dismiss, and she had a way of arriving in a room exactly when she was needed and saying exactly what she meant. She sat down across the table without being asked. "The Earl's steward came to the back door while you were finishing upstairs," she said. She did not look at Fenella. She looked at the fire, not the Earl himself. A gray-headed man, very correct. He said the Earl would return in the morning to complete the transfer, and that he wished to speak privately with the woman listed in the household inventory. She paused. His exact words were, "The woman listed between the sideboard and the curtains. I would never call you that, but those were his words." Fenella sat down slowly. "Did he say why?" "He did not, only that you were to be in the drawing room at 10 o'clock, and that no one else was to be present." Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Maura said quietly, "I've held my tongue about a great many things in 7 years, because it was not my place. But if an Earl is asking after you by name, then perhaps it becomes someone's business after all." She folded her hands on the table. "You hold yourself like a woman who was taught by someone who expected something of her. You keep the accounts in your head before you write them down. I have seen you in the library when you think no one is watching. Servants are not taught to read, Fenella. Not in this house, not in any house I have worked in. Someone taught you before you came here. Someone who thought you were worth the trouble." She rose. "Go into that room tomorrow with your head up. Whatever he asks, you answer him directly. Don't shrink." She moved toward the door and stopped. He read that list all the way to the bottom. Most men don't. He read it twice. That is not nothing. She went out, and the kitchen was quiet except for the fire settling in the grate. In the morning, Fenella washed in cold water and put on her good gray dress, which was her only good dress, and pinned her hair as neatly as she could manage. She looked at herself in the small clouded glass on the washstand, a thin woman with careful eyes and a stillness about her that 7 years of service had made permanent. She thought, whatever you were before you came here, there is very little of it left to see. Then she went down to the drawing room and waited. He arrived at 10:15, alone. She could see him properly now, a man of perhaps 30, quiet-faced, carrying the particular tiredness of someone who has held something a long time without setting it down. He did not look cruel. She had prepared herself, without quite admitting it, for cruelty, because in her experience power and cruelty kept easy company. His face was only watchful and still, with a stillness she recognized because it was her own. He stopped a short distance from her and did not sit. "You know who I am," he said. "The Earl of Caerwyn, my lord." "And do you know why I asked to see you?" "No, my lord." He studied her for a moment, not the way men usually studied a woman in service. There was nothing dismissive in it, nothing that made her want to step back. It was the look of a man measuring what stood before him against something he carried in his memory. She had the unsettling sense that she was either failing the comparison badly or passing it in a way she did not yet understand. "They listed you in the inventory," he said, "between the furniture and the curtains." "Yes, my lord." "Why?" The simplicity of it stopped her. "Because that is where a debt goes," she said at last. "They counted me as a debt. They wrote me where the cheap things are written. That is not what I asked." There was something harder in his voice now, the first edge she had heard from him. "A bonded servant is a matter for a separate contract. She is not property to be enumerated in a bill of sale alongside household goods. It is not legal, in point of fact, and the man who wrote it either did not know that, or did not care, or wanted very badly for you to be counted among things that could be handed off and forgotten." He took one step toward her. "So I will ask you the one question I came here to ask, and I want you to think before you answer, because more depends upon it than you may know." Fenella held herself still. "Ask it, my lord." Something moved behind the stillness of his face, grief perhaps, or hope, or both wound so tightly together she could not separate them. "The name in the inventory," he said. "Fenella Bride. Is that the name you were given when you were brought to this house?" She was quiet. "No, my lord, it is not." "Where did it come from?" She had not spoken of it in 7 years to anyone. She had not known there was anyone to speak of it to. "Bride was my mother's name before her marriage," she said. "I was told to use it. The woman who brought me here gave me the name and told me to answer to it, and after a time it was simply the name I had." Something went very still in the room. "And your mother," he said carefully, "her full name before her marriage. Do you know it?" "Catherine Bride. She was from the county east of here. I was told she died when I was small." The Earl was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then, "I knew a family named Bride in the county east of here. The last daughter of that family married Aldenmere. She had one child." He paused. "The child was recorded in the parish register as having died of fever 12 years ago. She was 8 years old." Fenella felt the cold settle into her bones, the particular cold of something true. "I did not die of fever," she said. It was the first time she had ever said it aloud, and she heard her own voice as though from a distance. "No," he said, "I don't believe you did." He reached inside his coat. "My family and the Aldenmares were connected by old business. When the estate passed to Sir Dacre and the child's death was recorded, my father received certain effects as a courtesy. Small things. Among them." He opened his hand. It was half of a painted miniature, an oval of ivory, perhaps 3 inches long, cut cleanly down the center. On one side, the figure of a woman in a blue gown, painted in delicate strokes. On the other side, the cut edge, and nothing. Fenella's hand went to her apron before her mind had finished the thought. The Earl saw it. He saw her face. "You have the other half," he said. She could not speak. She nodded once. "Then I need you to bring it to me. The 2 halves together, the mother's likeness and the child's, with the family inscription on the reverse. That is the beginning of a proof no one could have written in advance." He closed his hand around his half. "Without it, I have a story. A story is not enough. With it, we begin." She looked at him, and the words came without planning, the way words come when you have held them too long. "I used to look at the woman in the painting and try to remember her face in real life, and I never could. I thought it was because I was young when she died. I thought it was simply how memory works." She stopped. "It was my mother." "Yes," he said, "I believe it was." "I'll get it. It's upstairs, sewn into the lining of my apron. I've kept it there since I arrived." The laugh that came out of her had no humor in it. "I never knew it was proof of anything. I thought it was only mine, the one thing I had." She did not know, as she climbed the servant's stair, that Sir Dacre Collis had arrived at Heronmere that morning on a pretext about papers requiring his signature, and that he had been in the passage outside the drawing-room for some portion of the conversation he had not been invited to hear. A man who had spent 12 years maintaining a secret makes a habit of knowing what is being said in rooms he is not in. She unstitched the apron lining, with the small scissors she kept on the washstand, the same scissors she had used to stitch it closed again 100 times. She worked her fingers into the gap and felt for the small, hard oval she had carried for 12 years without knowing its full weight. The lining was empty. She searched it twice. She turned the apron inside out. She knelt on the floor and looked beneath the bed and behind the washstand and pulled back the mattress and dug through the ticking with both hands. The miniature was gone. The lining had been opened carefully and restitched carefully by someone who knew precisely what they were looking for. She was on her feet and moving before the full understanding had finished arriving. Through the small window on the landing she saw it. Sir Dacre at the front of the house, directing the loading of a traveling case with the composed efficiency of a man attending to ordinary business, not fleeing. Simply leaving at his own measured pace with the only thing in the world that could hang him tucked somewhere inside a locked case. She ran for the stairs, and the Earl's name was already in her mouth. He did not chase the carriage. She came into the drawing room breathless, the words already coming, and the Earl crossed to the window, looked once at the settling dust on the drive, and stood very still. "Why aren't you going after him?" she demanded. "He has it. He knows what it is. He is taking it to." "If I ride after him," the Earl said, not turning, "I overtake a man on a public road without a warrant and without authority in this county. I take from him by force an object he will swear he has never seen, and I become a nobleman who assaulted a gentleman and robbed him in broad daylight." He turned. "That is the story they will tell, and it is a better story than mine, because I will have handed them the evidence of it myself." She wanted to argue and found she could not, because he was right. "He wants me angry and without ground to stand on," the Earl said. The same quiet patience had settled back into his face. "He has shown me he is frightened. A man who was certain of himself would have stayed." What followed was 3 weeks of lawyers and letters, and the slow machinery of men who had spent years preparing for exactly this day, Sir Dacre's associates. And she learned there were associates, men who had paid for the fight in the silence, the falsified register, produced documents with impressive efficiency. The full death certificate from the parish, the physician's attestation, the burial record, every piece older than anything the Earl could produce, every piece certified and sealed. They were men who understood that in law the document written first wins, and they had spent 12 years making sure their documents were always first. And then a writ issued from the county court south, requiring that the woman at Heronmere calling herself Fenella bride, characterized therein as an impostor making fraudulent claim upon a settled inheritance, be taken into custody and removed to answer for it. The officers came on a gray morning, 2 of them, correct and unhurried, with the writ in a leather case and a closed carriage on the drive. The Earl argued with them. She watched him, and she knew he was losing, not because his argument was wrong, but because their paper was older and the law cared more about sequence than truth. "She is under my protection," he said, "in my house. The writ names her, my lord. We've no quarrel with you, but we're required to carry it out. The writ is built on a falsified register. That may be. It is not for us to judge. That is a matter for the court, and the court is south, and that is where she is bound." He looked at her then, across the room, and she saw what it cost him to remain still. The same thing it had cost her for 7 years. The discipline of a person who cannot afford to break when breaking would mean losing everything. "My lord," she said. Her voice came out steady, and she was glad of it. "Thank you for asking. No one ever asked before who I was or what I remembered." She paused. "Whatever happens now?" someone asked. "That is more than I had 3 weeks ago." The officer's hand was already at her arm, not unkindly. And the Earl of Caerwyn, who had been still and careful and patient through all of it, said, "Wait." Something had changed in his face. The tiredness was still there, but beneath it was something rising, something that had perhaps been there all along. "Officer," he said, "you will carry out the writ. I understand that, and I will not obstruct the law." He crossed to the writing desk in the corner of the room, unhurried, and drew a paper from the top drawer. "But before you proceed, I would ask you to note something for the court that sent you. A small matter of record." He unfolded a page she recognized, the third page of the household inventory, worn soft at the crease from being carried close against him for 3 weeks, and laid it flat on the desk. "The court that issued your writ has built its case on one premise," he said, "that the woman in this room is a thing, property, a line in a ledger, to be moved from place to place at the convenience of men with better papers." He smoothed the page with one hand. "It is a reasonable strategy, because property has no standing to contest anything. Property cannot walk into a court and speak on its own behalf." He looked at the officers directly. "It is unfortunate for the men who designed it that on the morning I read this inventory, 3 weeks ago, in this room, before any writ was issued and before any counterclaim was made, I did not sign my name beneath that line. I wrote something else instead. I wrote it into the transfer document of this estate, which is a filed and witnessed legal instrument, copied to the court that registered the sale." He turned the page so both officers could read what was written there. The room went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. The silence of men who have just understood that the ground they are standing on belongs to someone else. "Read it aloud," the Earl said quietly. "For her. She has not yet been permitted to hear it, and she has the most right of anyone in this room." The senior officer cleared his throat. He read the inventory line first. "Fenella bride, bonded housekeeper, 7 years' service, to transfer with the estate." And then he read the clause written beneath it, in a different, firmer hand. "I decline to receive any person as property. The individual entered above as bonded housekeeper is from this date a free person, her lawful status to be determined by a court of record and not by this ledger. The remainder of the estate I accept in full. Signed this day, Kerwin." The officer set the page down. No one spoke. Then the Earl said, "Your writ names a piece of property? There is no property here. There has been no property in this house since the morning I wrote that clause, and my solicitor filed it with the transfer of record, which was 3 weeks ago, before your court issued its order." He folded his hands. "You cannot execute a writ against property when the law has already recorded, filed, and witnessed that a person stands in its place. My document is older than your order, officer. It is not a private letter. It is a deed of record." The senior officer read the clause a second time. He read it the way the Earl had read her name on the very first day, carefully, and twice, making certain he had understood it correctly. "I'll carry no one today on a writ that names property," he said at last, "when there's a filed deed says there's no property here to carry." He closed the leather case. "That is a question for the courts, my lord, and above my station, I'll take it back and let them decide if they have the stomach for open proceedings." He looked at Fenella, and something moved across his weathered face. Not quite apology, but close to it. "For what it's worth, miss, I've served a good many writs. I know the ones that don't sit right. This one didn't sit right from the first. I'm not sorry to take it home unserved." He went out. The carriage on the drive departed without her. They did not have the stomach for open court. This is what Fenella would remember, in later years, as the most clarifying thing. That the men who had spent 12 years and considerable money building a lie discovered, when the lie was required to stand in daylight and answer questions from lawyers who had not been paid to look away, that it would not stand. The Earl did as he had said he would. He forced the matter into open proceedings, where the filed transfer deed meant Fenella had standing, had always had standing, from the morning he wrote that clause, and where every certified document the other side produced had to sit beside the questions the Earl's solicitors were now permitted to answer in front of men who could not be paid to ignore the answers. The payments to Sir Dacre traced through his ruined accounts. The physician's attestation, whose author turned out to have signed 3 other convenient documents for the same small circle of men across 12 years. And finally, Sir Dacre himself, found at a coastal inn with a locked traveling case, who discovered, when presented with the choice between criminal prosecution and a full account of everything, that honesty came to him with surprising ease. The miniature was produced. The Earl placed his half beside hers on the magistrate's table, and the 2 pieces of ivory, reunited after 12 years, resolved into a complete image. A woman in blue on one side, a small dark-haired girl on the other, and on the reverse, pressed together, the full family inscription in her father's hand. The register was corrected. The estate was returned. The men who had profited from a child's declared death did not profit from it any further. 2 years later, on an October morning, Maura helped Fenella into a dress that was not gray. She fussed and wept a little, in the way of women who are not given to weeping, and then she stepped back and said, with the directness that had always been her finest quality, "I told you that evening in the kitchen. Head up and answer him straight," I said. "And you never did shrink, not when they came with the writ, not when the lining was empty. I was proud of you then." She paused. "I'm prouder now." Fenella took her hands. "You told me what I needed to hear before I had any reason to believe it was true." "You were always something," Maura said simply. "They only wrote you down wrong." On the writing desk in the corner of the drawing room at Heronmere, framed against the wall above the window, hung the 3rd page of the old household inventory. She had wanted to burn it. The Earl had asked her to keep it instead. "It's the worst thing anyone ever wrote about me," she had said. "It is the thing that made you possible to save," he had answered. "Read the last line." So it hung there. Visitors would sometimes stop and read the clerk's careful hand, bonded housekeeper, to transfer with the property, and then read the clause below it in a different script, firm and unhurried. "I decline to receive any person as property." They would be quiet for a moment, those visitors, taking in the fact that both the cruelty and its undoing lived on the same page. Beside it, on the desk below, lay the pen, the Earl's own pen, the one he had used that first morning when he folded the page and put it against his heart, and walked out of the room knowing exactly what he had done, and said nothing of it to anyone. She had kept it. He had let her because he understood why. She picked it up sometimes and turned it in the light, and thought about a gray October morning, and a cold drawing room, and a man who read a household inventory all the way to the bottom, past the silver and the curtains and the good wool carpets, and found a person written there among the property, and quietly, without announcement, without asking anyone's permission, declined to let it stand. Outside in the yard she had once scrubbed on her knees. The morning was bright and entirely ordinary and entirely hers. She set the pen down and went to meet it.